Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's broadcast we'll be looking at the ultimate version of our Conjurer Bleeding build. This is our Shaman Occultist combination who focuses on two-handed weapons and making everything bleed to death over a very short period of time. This video is going to focus on endgame gear. It'll focus on components as well as augments to make sure that your resistances are maximum efficiency for keeping you alive long enough to pull out that big bad stick and slam people into the earth. So let's kick this video off without further ado. We have one big set that is going to make a lot of difference when it comes to the late game handling of this build, and it is only 3 pieces large. The good news is those 3 pieces. The bad news is that a couple of them are very difficult to change out for other sets, so you can't really do a whole lot of set combos with these 3 pieces, but you can make use of partial sets from other pieces that do the same type of damage and give your build the same type of buffs. That set is going to be our Wildheart Vanguard. The Wildheart Vanguard is 3 pieces, one of them being the mantle, which is shoulders, the girdle, which is belt, and the crusher, which is our big two-handed beaten stick. And that is all that you're going to need. Once you find those 3 pieces in their mythical versions, you have a very big power spike for this build. And obviously we need to talk about that beaten stick first because the weapon is the coolest part of the kit. The Wild Blood Crusher is going to add vitality damage baseline to your kit, is going to add a big buff to both your vitality and bleeding damage while throwing in buffs to vitality decay as well. You're going to get increased energy regen too, which isn't something that you might think is totally necessary, but when you do run into some of the ethereal enemies in Act 4 and 5, they will burn through your energy bar pretty quickly while you're slapping all your buttons. So, that being said, more energy regen is actually pretty good. The other thing that is really good about the Wild Blood Crusher is its massive increase in attack and casting speed. You'll get anywhere from 20 to 30% in both of those stats, and because you are going to be standing there holding the hit button down on big bad enemies, while also casting tons of other abilities, you want all of that to happen as quickly as possible. There are a lot of things going on in this build, but being able to maximize your uptime on your brute force, your upheaval, and your feral hunger are all going to be things that you want to do consistently. The attack speed coming from the Wild Blood Crusher and a bunch of our augments and components is going to be incredibly helpful for activating that stuff pretty consistently. That being said, again, the casting speed, since we have a pretty decent bar of buttons lined up down there with relatively low cooldowns, having more casting speed, being able to cast that stuff quicker is very good as well. After the casting speed, we're getting a small amount of movement speed, nothing to shake a stick at, but 4 to 6% just means we're going to be moving a little bit quicker between mobs. And we get +2 to all skills in Shaman. +2 is very big because that is going to allow us to fill up the Shaman bar quite a bit and take care of some really neglected skills on the occultist side of our build. That said though, that's all the generic stats for the Wild Blood Crusher, but it is going to be doing a couple of other things for some of our abilities, mainly adding a bunch of vitality, flat vitality damage to our Devouring Swarm. It is also going to reduce life leech resistance, and that means that anything in our kit that operates with some manner of lifesteal is going to steal even more life for us, which is pretty consistent healing for our build. Considering that we don't have a shield and we're not really devoting a whole bunch to defensive ability, we do have to rely on our health bar, so getting that bad boy healed up over and over again with any opportunity that we can is very important for staying alive. After the life leech shred though, you're going to get 12% of your attack damage converted to health for your grasping vines. Given that grasping vines is going to be a very big button in your kit, you can imagine that getting 12% of the ridiculous amount of damage that they can do back in health is going to be incredibly useful. So, making your vines vampiric is fantastic, but we're also going to take 100% of the physical damage that they do and convert that into vitality damage. Vitality being the secondary damage type now that we've entered Ultimate, with the main damage type being bleeding. Number 3 is still going to be physical, it's still going to be doing a lot of physical damage, but Vitality is definitely going to take its place up at the top with the bleeding damage. With our big stick out of the way, we can look at our tiny little belt, the piece that is holding the two big chunks of this set together. The mythical Wild Blood Girdle is going to give you also flat vitality damage for your kit, so we're getting a big boost in that stat by completing this set. The vitality and bleeding and vitality decay damage are also being buffed again, just like they were with the weapon itself, albeit it's about a quarter of the buff. The other kind of interesting stats coming from this belt, though, you're going to get 8% less damage from both Beast and Beastkin. So that means Beasts are dealing 8% less damage, but things like Trolls and Half-Beast types of enemies are going to be dealing 8% less damage to you as well. So really not something that you see a whole lot, but being that it is a just flat damage reduction for one entire faction, that is pretty awesome. The belt is also going to give you a big chunk of defensive ability, making you more difficult to hit, and even better than that, we're getting a huge bonus to both our elemental resistances and bleeding resistance. You're actually going to get double the amount of bleeding resist that you have in elemental resist typically, because your bleeding res can be anywhere from 40 to 60%. And your elemental is anywhere from 23 to 33. That is a huge amount, because in Ultimate, obviously, that bleeding is getting shredded by about 25%, and this belt can really just push you up and over in infinity and beyond kind of levels. After that, though, your maximum bleeding resist is also getting increased by 5% for just this belt. After that, you are going to get plus 3 points into your Grasping Vines, which again is our signature ability that we want to have maxed out. The only wasted stat on this belt is going to be the plus 3 into Wendigo Totem. And that ultimately is going to be up to you. So if you are the type of player who likes to use Wendigo Totem more than I did, definitely not going to waste those 3 points, but I ended up changing it out for Bloody Pox so that I could get more button spamming in a single span of time and run through these enemies. Wendigo Totem is still consistent enough as a healing totem, but I didn't feel like it was doing enough for me in the damage department, so I ended up swapping it out for Bloody Pox. That being said, there is only one more piece of the Wildheart Vanguard to talk about, and that would be the Mantle, our shoulder piece. It is going to do the same thing again in the Vitality, flat Vitality damage department. We're going to get a big chunk there, buffing all of our Vitality, bleeding, and Vitality decay damage yet again, just about a quarter of the weapon itself. So between the belt and the shoulders, you're going to be looking at about half of what the weapon is giving you for buffs to those damage. The shoulders are also going to give you a big chunk of offensive ability, making sure that you can crit harder and crit more often, while also providing you with your poison and acid resistance and elemental resistance buffs too. Shoulders are really probably the least impressive piece of this set, but they are still required because they are going to give you +2 into Entangling Vines. Entangling Vines being the mastery upgrade to Grasping Vines, and we need just as many points in that as we do is basic skill. So Blood Pact is going to be wasted, the +2 there, because Blood Pact is a Wendigo Totem mastery, but if you are going that route, remember, Blood Pact is going to help you out, making the Wendigo Totem deal more damage at the end. Now, With all of the pieces of the set out of the way, we can talk about what the set does as it comes together. With just 2 pieces, you're getting another 120% buff to your bleeding damage, and you are going to literally double the duration. You're going to get 100% increased duration for your bleeding damage, which is ridiculous because if you double all this insane amounts of damage that we're doing so far, you're only going to get twice the insanity. And I don't know about you, but anytime I see a wacky flailing inflatable arm tomb guy, I think about double bleeding damage. You're also getting another huge chunk of offensive ability. It is going to give you 75 just for completing a 2 set piece for this set. So if you get the weapon and the belt, the weapon and the shoulders and belt, anything of that combination, you're getting massive buffs to the damage that you can deal, as well as bigger opportunities to crit. And if you are going to get this set completed, you manage to find all 3, you get another large boost to your offensive ability in the amount of 4%. So if you're sitting pretty at 2,000 offensive ability right there, you're going to get another 80 offensive ability right there for completing the 3 set bonus. Add that 80 to the 75 that you already had, and this set is giving you more than 100 offensive ability. That number is only going to go up the more points that you put into your cunning bar or the other offensive ability coming from your other pieces of gear. Getting the offensive ability percent increase is going to be great for any build, especially one that needs to activate some damage off crits like we do with our Oleron Devotion. After the offensive ability percent buff though, we're getting a +3 into Devouring Swarm and a +3 into Grasping Vines, which again are 2 of our big bad abilities for this build. After those points buffing those abilities though, we're going to get another second duration to our Grasping Vines, making them last longer, deal more damage, do more life stealing. We're going to add 35% of the weapon damage to the Grasping Vines, further increasing those things that I just mentioned. We're going to add on some more flat bleeding damage to the Grasping Vines as well, and flat bleeding damage to the Devouring Swarm. We are raising the damage ceiling for these abilities, and it's going straight into space. This set is unbelievably effective at what it is accomplishing for the build that we set out to make, and I cannot understate just how useful it will be for your journey into Ultimate and beyond. It is a fantastic 3-piece, super efficient set, and if you can spend your time farming for something, this is the one that you want to farm for. Now, I did mention earlier in the build that because of the way this particular set works with the 2-handed weapon taking up one of the slots, it does conflict with a lot of other sets in case you wanted to mix and match. There is, however, 2 pieces of another set that do deal a lot of the, or they do buff a lot of the stats that we want, and they fit very perfectly into our Shaman Occultist Conjurer build. That set we're only going to use 2 pieces of, but that is the Blood Rager's Endless Frenzy. Now we want specifically the helmet, the mythical Blood Rager's cowl, and the coat, Blood Rager's mythical coat. These 2 alone are going to get us some very good stats for our bleeding damage, and the 2 set completed bonus is going to give us another 10% attack speed, which helps us swing that beaten stick so much more often. Now the coat is going to give you a buff to, it's going to increase your flat bleeding damage by a big chunk as well, over 3 seconds, but if you're taking into account the increase of the duration that we got from the previous set, that's jumping up to 6 seconds of bleeding damage. It's also buffing your physical, internal trauma, and bleeding damage as well. All of those damage types are good in this build, but only 2 of them are going to be really in the foreground. We're also getting big chunks of health. We're getting 4 to 6% of our base health increased, meaning that we are going to be a health pool of astronomical proportions by the end of this thing. We're also getting a big chunk of defensive ability, and our Aether and Elemental resistances are getting buffed as well. So just from these two sets we're clashing together, we're having a lot of Elemental resistance for dinner. This coat is also going to give you +3 to Feral Hunger, which is one of the main hand weapon abilities that we're using. So anytime that we're swinging that stick, we want to make sure that Feral Hunger is getting a bigger chance to activate, and this coat is helping that to happen. Now, more importantly than the coat, the helmet, we are going to be wearing the cowl. It does not actually give that flat bleeding damage, unfortunately. So the previous set that we had, everything was giving you some flat vitality. The helmet, it forewent the flat bleeding damage to get us a couple other really cool aspects. So, that being said, still going to buff the physical, internal, and bleeding damage, give you a big chunk of flat health, anywhere from 480 to 720. You're going to get a % increase to defensive ability, which is never a bad thing, and your Pierce and Chaos resistance are getting buffed as well. Chaos specifically being one of those stats that is difficult to get in Ultimate, so make sure that this helmet has a good roll for the Chaos res. It can be anywhere from 16 to 24, so if you're above 20, you're probably sitting pretty. After the reses, you're getting a +1 to all skills in Shaman to go along with the +2 from your Wild Blood Crusher, and that is +3 to everything in the Shaman kit. Fantastically opening up a lot of points for you to go back, take from your Spirit Guide, and put into your Occultist tree, mainly into your Heal button, your Bloody Pox, and Curse of Frailty. Each of those buttons are going to be very spammable and very easy to level up, making your damage better, but that is neither here nor there. The Blood Rager's Cowl, after it has given you the +1 to everything in Shaman, is going to do another 360 base bleeding damage to Savagery. I would say over 3 seconds, but we know it's all over 6 seconds by now, not counting all the other duration increases we get from Devotions, Components, Augments, you name it. After that, your granted skill is going to be Blood Frenzy. Blood Frenzy is going to activate 100% of the time on enemy death, though it does have a 5-second cooldown. It has a 15-second duration, giving you 6% of your health restored, buffing your bleeding damage, giving you a huge chunk of health regen, increasing that health regen by 33% again, and then you're going to get 10% attack speed. So take that with the fact that a 2-set bonus from just the helmet and the coat gives us 10% baseline. We're basically going to have 20% attack speed on top of all of our other attack speed while we're wearing this helmet and coat. Never sleep on attack speed when you've got a build that has anything that modifies auto attacks, especially with Savagery and everything going on that Shaman side of things with Feral Hunger, Brute Force. You get the idea. This 2-set bonus is incredibly helpful, and the Blood Frenzy from just the helmet of the Blood Rager set is going to be infinitely helpful as well. There are 2 more pieces of gear that we're going to talk about before I move over to the components and the augments for this build, and they are important for a few reasons. Number 1 is our massively necessary upgrade to our relic, and that is the Massacre Relic. The second is going to be our amulet upgrade, and that amulet can be crafted, and it goes by the name of Blood Surge. So, the relic to start things off is going to be giving you a lifesteal baseline, so you'll get 3 to 5% of your attack damage converted to health. You're getting a flat bleeding damage again from just this relic, while it increases your physical, internal trauma, and bleeding damage types to go along with our Blood Rager. You're getting a flat health bump as well, along with some basic chaos resistance, anywhere from 21 to 31%. After that, you're getting a +1 to everything in Shaman yet again, so we're up to +4 with just the gear in this video. And finally, you have got the Blood Spine granted skill coming from the relic. This activates a 20% of the time when you attack, and given that we attack literally so many times within the span of 3 seconds, it is always going to happen. It has a 0.7 second cooldown, fires off 5 projectiles, and it passes through enemies that it hits. It is going to use 10% of our weapon damage while dealing 122 physical damage and 510 bleeding damage over 3 seconds. The completion bonus for this relic as well is going to give you +1 to Tenacity of the Boar, which is that savagery upgrade that gets us more offensive ability, as well as +1 to Heart of the Wild, which is another % health increaser on the shaman side of things with your Mogdrogan's Pact. Massacre is perfect for this build. The only downside is that you have to get to level 90 in order to craft and equip it. Blood Surge, however, is our amulet and the last piece of gear that we're going to mention. Blood Surge gives you 18 to 26 physical flat damage while buffing your physical pierce and internal trauma along with your bleeding damage and increasing that bleeding damage duration even further. Blood Surge also gives you an attack and casting speed increase to go along with our Wild Blood Vanguard, and we're getting Aether resistance from it as well. After the Aether resistance goes, though, we're getting +3 to both of our Vine talents, which is phenomenal, so we can get those capped out. And then it is going to add another 120 physical damage to Grasping Vines, which gets converted into Vitality damage, if you'll remember. And we're getting 70 bleeding damage per second to the base of Grasping Vines as well. It is a phenomenal amulet that you can craft, but it does require a bunch of Eldritch Essence, unfortunately. And that's not everything either. It has its own skill called Blood Spout with a 15% chance on attack, which is, again, Pittance will be doing it all the time. It's on a 2-second cooldown with a 6-second duration, but in a 2.5 meter radius, you're dealing 80 physical damage, 45 vitality damage, and 200 bleeding damage over 2 seconds. All of those things scale with the astronomical buffs that we have for all of those damage types, but just remember, all of these activatable abilities from all the gear are going to be popping off so often, it is insane. Now, in the interest of keeping this video short and sweet, we're going to speed run the components and the augments, but we're going to start off with our weapon. For the Wild Blood Crusher, we're going to give that the Seal of Blades for the increase to piercing and bleeding damage, along with some more lifesteal for a passive that is always going. The Seal of Blades, you can get that starting at level 75, assuming that you have the recipe to craft it. So go farm that bad boy, lock the Seal of Blades into your Wild Blood Crusher, and have yourself a time. After that, the next big component that you'll want to look for is going to be some Black Tallow. Black Tallow is an amulet and metal upgrade. The component mainly we're using for the chaos resistance. Gives you a 16% chaos res with a big chunk of defensive ability and 6% less damage from chthonics. Get that in there, make sure that you are covering that chaos resistance gap because it is pretty prevalent in Ultimate. After that, you're going to want to pick up the component, the Runebound Topaz, for one of your rings so that you can get that 52 defensive ability, 160 flat health, and most importantly, the 10% reduction in stun duration. CC is going to be a nightmare in this difficulty, so make sure that you are completely avoiding that as much as possible. After that, you're going to be looking for some Spell Scorched plating for your pants. That plating is going to give you 100 health base, it's going to give you 20% pierce resistance and 15% elemental resistance. Your chest piece will get loaded up with the Sacred Plating, which is yet another buff to your base health bar of 210, while giving you 14 vitality resistance and 18 aether resistance. It's also bumping up your armor absorption, making sure that your armor takes more of a hit than your health bar does. You are going to need quite a few anti-venom salves. These are pretty easy to build up, but you'll want to put them in both your boots and your belt for an easy 40% poison and acid resistance. Moreover, you're going to want to build up some Ugenbog leather for your shoulders to get the defensive ability, poison and acid resistance, and bleeding resistance of 20% as well. The leather is a little bit harder to build up than the anti-venom salves, so definitely use those sparingly. After that, though, augments that we are looking at specifically for our rings and amulet, we're all going to have the Blood Rose Thorn. This is found at the Coven of Ogdenbog. Those ladies will give you the Blood Rose Thorn at a level 3 of your reputation. I believe that's honored. But this is going to give you another 36 base bleeding damage over 3 seconds while buffing that bleeding damage as well. Put one of these on both of your rings and your amulets for a very big spike in your flat damage. It is nutty how much they jumped up with just that. Really can't recommend highly. As for the very last augment, that I think is important, you are going to want to pick up the Potent Dermapterin Chitin. This is something that you'll be able to get from the Homestead vendor at the honored tier of reputation, but this specifically is going to help us round out that reduced stun duration by 20%. It's also going to increase your armor by 8% and give you 16% pierce res, but most importantly is that stun reduction duration, because without this specific augment, we are below 80. That being said, that is everything for the Conjurer Bleeding build. This is a magnificently fun build to play, especially if you're able to farm up these set pieces and get things rounded out. I look forward very much to continuing on with this build specifically because it has been an absolute blast. But that is it for me, everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'll be back next time with a new build, and I'll see you there.